very difficult to imagine a perfect world. And no doubt all of us have a very different idea of what a perfect world would be. In a recent YouTube video, an illustrator asked a bunch of kids for their description of a perfect world. The answers ranged from a place where the sun is pizza to a place where the ground is slime. Now those probably weren't the first things that came to your mind when you thought about what a perfect world would look like. However, what we can all agree on, whether we're 5 years old or 95 years old, is that this world is far from perfect. Every day, we're given more and more and more reminders about how our world is broken. We need passwords to our phones and social media accounts in the fear that someone might hack into them. We perhaps sympathetically drive past a number of people on the side of the road who've crashed into each other's cars. We lock our doors, we pay for insurance, we take days off school on sick, we get stressed about exams, we feel insecure when looking at other people's Instagram or TikTok posts. All of this really teaches us the same truth. Our world is broken and it needs fixing. But why? Well, if you were to survey 1,000 people, they might give you 1,000 different answers as to why our world is broken. However, the one thing that each of the answers would likely have in common is this: it's someone else's fault. Some might point the finger and say, it's because of power-hungry people in charge. Others might say, it's because of religion, it divides. Someone else might say, it's because of that group of people and their lack of love. You see, the one thing that every answer will have in common about why our world is broken is that it's because of what someone else did or continues to do. Yet the Bible's answer as to why this world is broken is altogether different. Why is the world the way it is, according to the Bible? Because of me. Not just me, Matthew Campbell, but you too, us. We are the problem. Humanity are the problem because humanity is not inherently good. That's what we're often told, isn't it? We're often told that at the deepest level, we are all good people. And we like to think that we're good people. Who wouldn't? Yet the Bible says we're not good people. We are broken people. We are people who have all been infected and affected by a disease called sin. And the first time we read of this disease called sin is in Genesis chapter 3. Hopefully as a group you've had a chance to read Genesis chapter 3 verses 1 to 7. And the first two chapters of Genesis really showed us how God creates a perfect world. Probably much like the one you had in your mind when you discussed that question earlier on. God creates the earth, the sun, the sea, the animals, etc., etc., etc. And what is God's reflection as he looks at everything he created? He says in the very last verse of chapter 1, it was very good. However, the pinnacle of God's creation was humanity. This was the high point of creation. There was something different about humans than, for example, animals. What was the difference? Well, humans are said to be created in God's image and likeness. In other words, there is something in us that bears likeness to him. We all have inherent value that is unique to us as humans. You possess a value, for example, that your dog doesn't. Yet when we get to chapter 3, we discover that humans rebel against their creator. A serpent enters the story. The Bible would later identify the serpent as Satan himself. And what does Satan do? Well, he does 4 things that I want us to look at just now. The first thing he does is this. He makes humanity question God's authority. He makes humanity question God's authority. See, God had placed Adam and Eve in this terrific garden, the Garden of Eden, and there was really only one rule. They were not to eat from one particular tree in the garden. But notice in these first 4 verses what Satan says to Adam and Eve. He asks the question, did God really say that you shouldn't eat of the tree of good and evil? He starts casting doubts in their mind about what God had said. Then when Adam and Eve respond by saying, no, God says if we eat of this tree, we will die. And what does the serpent do? He laughs and he says, you won't surely die. That's nonsense. Do you see what the serpent's doing? He's making Adam and Eve question God's authority. And you know, we as humans, we've been doing the same thing ever since. We've been questioning God's words in the Bible. We question whether or not God really means what he says, and we question whether or not the consequences of disobedience will really be as bad as he claims that they will be. And so the first thing Satan does is that he makes humanity question God's authority. But the second thing Satan does is he makes God's rules seem restrictive. You see, the serpent paints this picture of God that just makes him out to be this cosmic killjoy. Look what he says in verse 5. He says, you won't die. That's nonsense. Here's what's really going on. God knows that if you eat this fruit, you will be like him. Don't you want to be like God? God's got this hidden agenda. He just wants you to stop having fun. And don't you see the same mindset all around us today? God's rules are boring. If you want to have fun, you need to ignore them. Don't get drunk. Don't have sex before marriage. Don't be a glutton. Don't gossip. Are you kidding me? This God must be a cosmic killjoy. It's the second thing that Satan does. He makes God's rules seem restrictive. But notice the third thing that he does. He tells Adam and Eve, if it feels good, do it. If it feels good, do it. You know, you might think to yourself, how can we really blame Adam and Eve? I mean, at the end of the day, they're just following their desires, are they not? Follow your heart. That's what we're always told to do. Eve saw the fruit looked good and she took it. What's so bad about that? Surely that will bring her happiness, because that's what following your own desires does. Isn't that true? Well, not quite. Why? Because the fourth thing that we see is that Satan did not tell them about the consequences of their disobedience. He does not tell Adam and Eve about the consequences of disobedience. You see, Adam and Eve, about 1 second after disobeying, realized their foolishness. Sure, they were just chasing their desires, but they were like a mouse pursuing the cheese. As soon as they tasted it, the trap was set. And notice the twofold result of their disobedience. Firstly, they felt guilt. Verse 7 says they realized they were naked and ashamed, and so they tried to cover themselves with leaves. Straight away, they felt horrendous guilt. And we're not often told that about disobedience, sure we're not. We're told it will feel awesome, it will taste great, but the hidden terms and conditions reveal that actually, we will often also feel great guilt. But far worse than that, Adam and Eve didn't just feel shame, they faced judgment. Because they disobeyed God, they deserve his judgment and his punishment, because if God really is a fair God, then all wrongs must be punished. And so as you read through the rest of chapter 3, we see the punishment that humanity would face as a result of their sin. Ultimately, because of this sin, death entered our world and it becomes our master. It becomes the one thing we cannot defeat.